You may have heard of the phrase, you are the average of the 5 people who you spend most of your time with, but recently I've come across a variation of this by Chris Williamson, which is, you are the average of the 5 podcasts you listen to most frequently. So in this video I'm going to share with you 10 of the most beneficial and stimulating podcast episodes that I've ever listened to or watched, and ultimately these are 10 of the most impactful pieces of content that I've ever come across. Many of the guests referenced in this particular list of episodes appear overall in more than one of these podcasts, so the only criteria that I'm following is that I can't include the same guest more than once, so I've specifically chosen the occasion or the episode that I think presents them in the best possible light. Apart from that, the only other restriction that I'm going to be implementing is that all of these episodes have to be timeless and they have to impart some kind of practical lesson or takeaway. So without further delay, let's start the list, and kicking things off is an episode from Diary of a CEO, and that is with Logan Ury. Logan Ury is the head of relationship science at Hinge, the dating app, and the author of How to Not Die Alone, which I've mentioned many times on this channel. In this episode, she brings up ideas such as attachment theory, how to build a secure relationship, the 3 dating tendencies, and eventually even moves on to things such as how to build a good dating profile. But I think my favourite topic covered is what are the traits or qualities of a potential date or partner that correlate with long-term relationship success. I know to some people following a list like this might seem like it's removing some of the magic from romance, but in my opinion it actually enhances your ability to find that romance, because you can also go with your heart or your gut, but combine that with the things that are proven and shown to be healthy in the long term. Moving on to number 9 is an episode from Deep Dive with Ali Abdaal, and that is with the guest Louise Perry. Louise is a very intelligent and articulate female writer and feminist, but what I really like about this one is that she's able to bring to the table a lot of the core ideas and themes from feminism, but in a way that doesn't cause divide between the genders. So for example, rather than pinning all of women's problems on men, she acknowledges that there's a fundamental difference between men and women, and understanding this difference from both the men's perspective and the woman's perspective can increase the overall levels of cohesion and cooperation between them. She talks about, for example, how technology and dating apps affect both men and women, and in some cases differently, and eventually moves on to some of the heavier topics around sexual abuse and sexual assault, but does so in a very delicate and well-considered way without diluting the quality of the conversation. At number 8 is an episode from Modern Wisdom, and that is with the guest Jimmy Carr. I found this episode particularly insightful for a number of reasons, and one of them is the character of Jimmy Carr himself, and how he presents himself on stage is actually quite different to who the individual person is behind the scenes. It's also very interesting to see in general what a comedian's insight into comedy actually is, and what are the common threads or themes that cause someone to become a comedian, and the importance and prevalence of comedy in today's world. He also covers some of the more general themes such as cancellation culture, and then moves on to some more philosophical ideas such as self-esteem, happiness, and finding your purpose. I also like his personal take on flow states, and that the meaning of life is to just enjoy the passage of time. Number 7 is an episode from the Lex Fridman podcast with Douglas Murray. This one in many ways is a history lesson, but it's either the history lesson that we're no longer taught, or the one that many people refuse to acknowledge. The eloquence and precision in which these topics are discussed is genuinely amazing to listen to, and topics such as racism and Western culture is discussed in a lot of detail. Later on in the episode they move on to topics such as gratitude, purpose, and even love. At number 6 is another entry from Modern Wisdom, but this time it's with Alex Hormozi. Picking out a single episode of Alex Hormozi on Modern Wisdom is particularly challenging because he's been on several times and each one is a treat to behold. To some people, Alex might seem extreme, excessive, or even obsessed, but there's nothing that will fire you up more, particularly if you have long-term business goals or ambitions, than listening to one of the 3-hour episodes with Alex Hormozi. Some of the topics covered is how to stop worrying what other people think of you, and how to push through or even embrace the discomfort required to be successful. More generally, it's about productivity, optimism, and success. So if you're an aspiring entrepreneur, then this is definitely an episode that you should check out. Number 5 is another Modern Wisdom episode, but this time with Dr. Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson has been on the show and other shows many times, but if you're looking for something that's reflective, philosophical, and help you come to terms with what you have, what you're aiming for, and ultimately improve your life, then listening to one of these episodes, particularly the one that I've linked down below, is definitely worth it. Topics covered include the importance of experiencing challenge, telling the truth, and even things such as mental health today, and the importance of relationships and how to know when you found a good one and when to say goodbye to the one that you currently have. Jordan Peterson is a big advocate for healthy relationships, and he unfolds and dissects things such as marriage, explains why they're important, and helps you navigate the various obstacles that you may come across over the course of its duration. Unfortunately, Jordan is seen by many people and groups to be a controversial figure, particularly because of his take on certain types of politics. But when you see Jordan in this particular light, focusing on these particular topics such as psychology and philosophy, it's hard not to appreciate the kind of advice that he has to offer. I've actually made a video on some of the biggest lessons that I've personally learned from Jordan Peterson, so feel free to check that out if you're interested. And now moving on to number 4, and that is Diary of a CEO with Professor Steve Peters. If you're not already familiar, Professor Steve Peters is the author of The Chimp Paradox, which is personally one of the most impactful books that I've ever read and come across, so definitely check that out if you're interested. And in addition, I've also made a video on that, but in this particular episode, he summarizes the whole concept of the chimp model really well and helps explain how you can navigate the various mental health obstacles that you'll come across using this particular framework. He's worked with and studied every type of person imaginable, from psychopaths all the way to successful Olympic athletes. The main idea though is that if you're able to understand your emotions and how your mind operates on a fundamental level, it can help you navigate life more easily and help you become a more calm person in the long term. Number 3 is Diary of a CEO with Mo Gawdat, and he's often thought of as one of the biggest experts on happiness. In this episode, he reveals his own personal story and struggle with the untimely passing of his son, and how he's used that to build up and deepen his understanding of life and even happiness in general as a result of it. One of the core ideas is that happiness is a choice, and I think he's particularly qualified to make this case given the death of his son. But his whole argument is that while it might be justified to be unhappy given your current circumstances, it's much better if you choose to be happy, and that choice is possible and can be thought of as a skill to develop. He often explains happiness through the methods of science and mathematics. He's even come up with an equation for this, which is happiness is when your reality exceeds your expectations, and when you're unhappy, it's because your reality is fallen short of your expectations. So in many ways, we can't control what happens to us, but we can in some ways control our expectations for what could come. He explains this through the analogy of nature, and how when we're in nature, we often don't feel unhappy because we don't actually expect nature to do anything particularly unexpected during those times. The last part of this podcast, then, he talks about AI and how this is actually the greatest pandemic of our time, and we need to be aware of the repercussions, the effects, and the growing rates at which it's evolving. Since that episode, he's been on the show more than once, and he's even done an entire episode dedicated to the whole idea of AI. So definitely check those out if you're interested in these topics or on the ideas of happiness overall. Now moving on to number 2, and it's another Diary of a CEO, but this time with Dr. Matthew Walker. If you're a subscriber here, or if you've been following this channel for a while, you'll probably know that I'm a big fan of Matthew Walker and his book Why We Sleep. But in this episode, you can really see his ability to communicate his ideas, how he comes across as a really diligent, articulate, but even sympathetic and compassionate guy, and his knowledge around sleep is second to none. In this episode, he covers ideas such as chronotypes, the sleep cycle, napping, caffeine, alcohol, and many more, and how they all affect sleep in their own way. He even goes into ideas such as sleep deprivation and its consequences, and eventually shares some of the best strategies to improving your sleep and how this can improve your life overall. If you want to understand some of these ideas in a shorter format, then definitely check out my previous video, which is on this very topic, but it's no substitute for listening to the full episode or reading his book. And now moving on to the top spot, and that is the Joe Rogan Experience with Naval Ravikant. I think there are very few people out there, and Naval is definitely one of them, who has such a well-rounded knowledge and deep understanding about many of life's topics, especially from first principles. You may have heard of the term eye candy, but for me, in my opinion, this is the very definition of ear candy. There are so many practical takeaways here, from wealth creation to happiness to inner peace and many more. But you can even go into detail with each of these topics separately on Naval's own channel, which I highly recommend. And he's got a 3.5 hour one on making money and becoming rich. And he's got another one that is closer to an hour or half an hour, I can't quite remember, which is on how to find happiness. I think the thing that I admire most about Naval is his ability to understand and absorb really detailed and complicated ideas, but explain them in a way that most people can understand. Overall, if you enjoyed this list or are familiar with some of the episodes that I've mentioned, feel free to let me know, or even give me some suggestions for other podcast episodes or podcasts in general that I might like. Otherwise, if you got something from this video and enjoyed it, feel free to either like, subscribe, or both. Otherwise, I will see you in the next video.